copier down the hall had been jamming for 3 weeks. Nobody fixed it. That was my first clue about how things worked at Harman & Price. Not what needed doing, but who was watching when you did it. I'd been there 11 years. 11 years of early mornings and late Fridays, of learning every client's quirk and every contract's landmine before anyone else in the room even opened the folder. I ran the operations division, not in title. My title was Senior Operations Manager. But in practice, in the way that actually mattered. My boss knew it. The clients knew it. Even the guys in accounting knew it, because I was the one they called when a number didn't add up at 4:30 on a Thursday afternoon. My wife used to joke that Harman & Price was my second marriage. She wasn't entirely wrong. I'm not going to pretend I was perfect. I could be impatient. I expected people to keep up, and not everyone could. But I showed up. Every single day I showed up, and I did the work, and I did it well enough that the company grew its operations revenue by 38% over my first 6 years. I have the reports. I kept copies. That detail matters. Remember that I kept copies. My boss, I'll call him my division head, had been there longer than me. 20-something years. He was the kind of man who filled a room without raising his voice, which I respected. We had a good working relationship. Not close, not friendly in the way you grab lunch together, but solid, professional. I trusted him the way you trust a contractor who's built you a good deck. You don't need to be friends, you just need the work to hold. Then his son-in-law joined the company. He was 26. I know because he mentioned it 3 times in his first week, the way 26-year-olds do when they're in rooms full of people who remember being 26 differently than they imagine it. His name doesn't matter. I'll just call him what he was, my division head's son-in-law, because that's the only reason any of this happened. His background was in marketing. Digital marketing, specifically, which is a fine thing to know if you work in digital marketing. We were an operations firm. We manage logistics pipelines for mid-sized manufacturers. It's detailed, specific, unglamorous work that requires you to understand systems that don't forgive mistakes. I'm not saying a smart person can't learn it. I'm saying it takes time, years, not months. He was given the title of Operations Development Lead. I had to look that up in the company directory because I'd never heard it before. When I asked HR what the role entailed, the woman I spoke to paused for a beat too long before telling me it was a newly created position to help modernize our client communication strategy. I thanked her and went back to my desk and sat there for a minute listening to the hum of the building. I wasn't angry yet. I want to be honest about that. I was confused. I thought maybe there was a business reason I wasn't seeing. Companies create roles. Strategies shift. I've been around long enough to know that not every decision gets explained down the chain, so I waited. The first month, he shadowed me. That's what my division head called it, shadowing. I didn't mind. I've mentored people before. I like teaching, actually. When someone genuinely wants to learn, there's something satisfying about watching them get it. So I walked him through the client roster, the pipeline systems, the escalation protocols. I explained why certain clients needed a phone call instead of an email, and why others wanted data before they wanted conversation. He nodded a lot. He took notes on his phone, which I noticed but didn't mention. He asked reasonable questions. I gave him credit for that. The second month he started attending my client calls. Still fine. He was quiet on those calls, which I appreciated. One of the things you learn in operations is that silence at the right moment is a skill. Then he started talking on the calls, not badly at first, just inserting himself, asking a question I'd already covered, or summarizing something I'd just said as if it were his own thought. The clients were polite about it. Most of them had worked with me long enough that they'd glance at me when he spoke, the way you glance at your host when a new guest says something unexpected at dinner. I pulled him aside after one of those calls. I kept it friendly. I said, "Hey, I want to make sure we're presenting a unified front to clients. It helps to coordinate beforehand on who's taking which points." He said absolutely totally fair. He appreciated the feedback. It happened again the next week. I let it go. That was probably a mistake, but I had actual work to do and I chose the work. The third month is when things shifted in a way I couldn't rationalize anymore. My division head called me into his office on a Tuesday morning. I remember it was Tuesday because I had a client review call at 10 and I was watching the clock. He told me that going forward, my son-in-law would be co-leading the Henderson accounts with me. The Henderson accounts were my largest client relationship. I built that relationship from a cold introduction at an industry conference 8 years earlier. The Henderson people called me by my first name. They sent a card when my father passed. I asked my division head what had prompted the change. He said the company wanted to develop broader client relationship capabilities across the leadership team. He said it in the tone of someone reading from a document they didn't write. I said, okay. I said I understood. I went back to my desk, closed my office door, and called my wife. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "How are you feeling?" And I said I wasn't sure yet. The Henderson call that Friday was the first one I dreaded in 8 years. He was on the call. He'd clearly prepared. I'll give him that. He'd pulled some of the reports I'd submitted over the past quarter and summarized them in a slide deck. The Henderson team was polite. They asked him questions. They answered his questions. At the end of the call, their procurement director, a woman I'd worked with for 6 years, someone whose kid I'd asked about by name every quarter, said, "It's always good to connect. We'll follow up on the timeline items." She said it to the screen generally, not to me. That was the moment I felt it. Not anger. Something quieter and heavier than anger. I went home that night, and I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes before going inside. My wife was in the kitchen, and she knew from the way I walked in that it wasn't a good night. She poured me a glass of water and sat down across from me and didn't ask anything, just waited. I told her what had happened on the call. She listened. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" I said I didn't know yet. I didn't know yet because I still had a mortgage, and my son was starting his junior year, and my daughter had 2 more years before she was done with her program, and the math of walking away from an 11-year salary doesn't get simpler just because you feel wronged. So I kept going. For 3 months I kept going. I showed up. I did the work. I was professional on every call, in every meeting, in every hallway interaction. I trained him when he asked. I covered for the gaps he created without announcing that I was covering them. I was, in every measurable way, still the person who ran operations. And I watched. I watched the Henderson relationship start to wobble. Not collapse. He wasn't incompetent, I want to be fair, but wobble. A timeline commitment that got communicated incorrectly. A contract addendum that should have been flagged 3 weeks earlier. Nothing catastrophic, just the slow accumulation of small errors that signal to a client that someone doesn't fully understand the machinery they're operating. I watched my division head look away from those errors in every weekly review meeting. I watched the org chart get updated one afternoon without any announcement. My title was the same, but there was a new box, and his title had changed from Operations Development Lead to Deputy Director of Client Operations. Deputy Director. He had been at the company for 5 months. I had been Senior Operations Manager for 4 years. I sat with my wife that night and I said, "I think we both know what this is." She said yes. I said, "I need a few more weeks to get my paperwork in order." She said, "Take whatever time you need." I said, "I love you." She said, "I love you." She said, "I know. Now go to sleep." I spent the next 3 weeks being very, very organized. I documented everything I was responsible for. Every active client relationship, every open project, every protocol and system I built or maintained. Not to sabotage. I want to be clear about that. I'm not that person. I documented it because when I left, I wanted there to be a record of what I had actually been doing in case anyone ever asked. I also had a conversation with an attorney, just to understand my options, just to know what I had. I gave my notice on a Thursday morning. I typed the letter the night before, read it twice, and slept better than I had in months. I printed it and put it in an envelope, and when I walked into my division head's office, I was calm. He looked surprised. Genuinely surprised, which told me something about how clearly he'd been seeing things. He asked if I'd consider staying through a transition period. I said 2 weeks, no more. He asked if there was anything that would change my mind. I said no. We shook hands. He seemed like he wanted to say something else but didn't. I walked out, closed the door, and went back to my desk. I spent my last 2 weeks doing exactly what I'd always done. Not more, not less. Every file organized, every handoff documented, every client note updated. I sent personal emails to each of my long-term client contacts, Henderson included, thanking them for years of good work together. I didn't say where I was going. I didn't say anything negative. I just said it had been a privilege. On my last day, I packed the 2 personal items I had on my desk, a photograph and a small wooden thing my son made in shop class years ago, into a bag, and I left. No going away party. That was my choice. I said no when they offered. I don't need a cake to close a chapter. I drove home in the early afternoon for the first time in 11 years. My wife was surprised to see me. She'd forgotten exactly what day it was, which was actually funny, and we laughed. We went out for lunch somewhere we'd been meaning to go for 2 years. It was good. We talked about things that weren't work. I felt something unclench in my chest that I hadn't even noticed was clenched. I want to stop here and be honest, because I know how these stories are supposed to go, and I want to give you the real version, not the version that sounds cleaner in hindsight. The first 2 weeks after I left, I was scared. Not all the time, but at night, lying in the dark, I'd do the math. The mortgage, my son's tuition, my daughter's last stretch, the number of months before I needed something solid. I built savings, we were okay, but okay feels a lot thinner at 2 in the morning than it does on a spreadsheet in daylight. I sent out feelers, made some calls, had some coffee, let people know I was available, and then I waited. About 6 weeks after I left, I got a call from the Henderson procurement director, the woman who'd said, "It's always good to connect," to the screen on that Friday call. She said, and I'm going to paraphrase because I'm not going to pretend I remember every word. She said they'd had some complications with their current operations contact and she wanted to ask if I was available for a consultation. She said it carefully and professionally, the way people do when they're not sure what they're allowed to say. I said I'd be happy to meet. We met at a coffee place, she suggested. Neutral ground. She explained that the handoff on their account had not gone well. Not catastrophically, she was diplomatic about that, but there had been issues. A timeline miscommunication that cost them 2 weeks on a delivery cycle. A contract question that had been answered incorrectly. She said they'd gone back through their records and realized how much of their operational reliability over the past several years had been, in her words, really coming from one place. She asked if I'd be interested in taking them on as a private consulting client. I drove home slowly. I sat in my car again in the driveway. Different from before, different feeling entirely. I called my wife. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a second, and then she laughed. Not a mean laugh, just the kind of laugh that escapes when something turns out the way it should. Henderson wasn't the only call. 2 other clients I'd worked with for years reached out over the following 2 months. Not all at once. These things move slowly in this industry, but steadily, the way trust works. One by one. I never called my former division head. I never emailed him. I never posted anything about what had happened. There's nothing on my LinkedIn about Harmon and Price except the dates of employment and the title I was given, not the one I actually held. A colleague I'm still in touch with told me months later that the Henderson account had officially gone to an outside firm. That there had been a meeting about the loss. That my name had come up in that meeting. He didn't say in what context, and I didn't ask. I'm not glad that things went badly. I want to be clear about that. I don't want anyone to fail. But I do believe what happened because I was actually there all along. Not in a personal sense, not revenge, just in the simplest operational sense. I was the system that held things together. And when you remove a load-bearing thing, the structure shows you what it was doing. I have my own practice now. Small. 4 major clients, 2 of whom you'd know if I named the industries. I work from a converted room in my house that used to be a junk room my wife had been trying to get me to clean out for years. She was very gracious about not saying "I told you so." I make a little less than I did at Harmon and Price, not dramatically less, and I work about 15% fewer hours. I answer my own phone. I make my own calls. Nobody updates an org chart with my name on it without asking me first. My son called me last week. He's doing well. He's about to finish his degree and he's nervous about what comes next, the way you're supposed to be. He asked me what I wish someone had told me at his age about work. I thought about it for a minute. I said, find out early whether the place you're working actually sees you. Not your output. Not your results. You. Because you can produce excellent work in a place that doesn't see you, and you can do it for years, and the work will be real, and the results will be real. But one day something will happen. A promotion that goes somewhere it shouldn't, a title that appears on an org chart without a conversation. And you'll realize the work was never the currency they were trading in. I told them the work still matters. Do good work. But do it somewhere that notices. He said, "Okay, Dad." I said, "Okay." I went back to my desk and opened my client files and got back to work. I still think about the moment I sat in my car in the driveway that second time. Not the first time. The first time was heavy, all dread and math. The second time was different. The Henderson call. My wife laughing on the phone. I sat there and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, which was that the ground under me was solid, because I had built it, not because someone had decided to let me stand on theirs. That's the thing nobody tells you clearly enough when you're young and working hard and believing in the place you work. The ground you stand on at someone else's company is always theirs to move. You can do everything right, show up, learn the systems, build the relationships, stay late when it matters, and stay quiet when that matters more, and it still belongs to them. The moment I understood that wasn't the moment my division head announced his son-in-law's new title. It was earlier. It was the Tuesday morning I walked out of that office and realized I hadn't been seen in years. The promotion was just the part that made it impossible to keep pretending otherwise. I don't think my division head was a bad person. I've had time to sit with that. He made a decision that served his family, and he told himself a story about strategy to make it easier to say out loud. People do that. What mattered to me was that I stopped needing him to admit it. The day I stopped needing him to admit it, the day I stopped needing his acknowledgement, was the day I actually got free. I think about what I told my son. Find out early whether the place you're in actually sees you. I meant it, but I've had more time to think about what seeing really requires. It requires honesty first, not the comfortable kind, but the kind that asks hard questions about whether you're being treated fairly and answers them without excuses. I stayed at Harmon & Price 3 months longer than I should have because I kept finding reasons to give the situation the benefit of the doubt. That wasn't patience. That was me being dishonest with myself about what I was watching. It also requires a certain kind of clear-headedness, the ability to separate what you feel from what is actually true and to plan from the truth rather than the feeling. The feeling, those nights, was fear. The truth was that I had 11 years of documented results, relationships built on real trust, and skills that were portable. Fear and truth aren't the same thing, and one of them is more useful. And then there's what got me out of bed every morning during those uncertain weeks after I left, which was simply not being willing to stop. Not stubbornness exactly, more like the refusal to let someone else's bad decision become my ending. The Henderson call came because I had spent 8 years earning it. That doesn't happen passively. It happens because you show up with enough consistency that your absence becomes noticeable. My wife kept the junk room clean while I built the practice in it. My son called when he needed advice. My daughter finished her program. The mortgage got paid. None of it was dramatic. That's the part I want people to hear. There was no confrontation, no speech, no moment where the room went quiet and everyone saw the truth at once. I just left, did good work, and let the structure show what I'd been holding up. That turned out to be enough.